Hello, my dear masterminds. They always act like loyalty is the rule until they see where you really come from. That's when the whole energy flips. You feel it immediately, don't you? The subtle shift in tone, the way the smiles tighten just a little too much, the way voices soften, not out of kindness, but calculation. The room doesn't get louder when truth walks in wearing your face. It gets quieter because people don't know how to behave around something they misjudged for too long. For a long time, they were comfortable with you. Comfortable because they thought they understood you. Comfortable because they believed your silence meant simplicity. Your patience meant weakness. Your calm meant a lack of depth. They assumed you were predictable, manageable, easy to place into a small box that made them feel secure about their own position in the world. They didn't feel threatened by you then. They didn't feel the need to watch their words. They didn't hesitate before speaking. They laughed freely, judged casually, and moved carelessly around you, convinced you were just another background character in a story that revolved around them. But then something changed, not you, their perception. The moment they started to realize where you really come from, everything shifted. Not just your background as a place, but your background as pressure, as responsibility, as survival, as early lessons you never asked for but had to learn anyway. They began to sense that your composure wasn't accidental, that your restraint wasn't natural softness, that your discipline wasn't something you picked up recently. It was built into you. You didn't grow in environments where mistakes were gentle. You didn't come from spaces that allowed fragility without consequence. You learned early how to read the room, how to measure words, how to observe patterns before reacting. You learned how to stay standing when things felt heavy because collapsing wasn't an option, and that kind of origin leaves a signature in a person. They started to see it in your eyes, in the way you listen more than you speak, in how you don't rush to explain yourself, in how you don't panic when things shift. That's when loyalty stopped being casual for them. Because loyalty feels easy when you believe someone has nowhere else to stand. It feels optional when you assume someone's strength is borrowed. But the second they sense that your strength is rooted, earned, permanent, something inside them recalibrated. People switch up fast when they realize your past isn't a weakness. It's a foundation. They didn't know what to do with that information at first. Some of them tried to mask it with admiration, others with distance. Some suddenly became quieter around you. Some overly polite, some awkwardly supportive, some conveniently absent. Because when people recognize that you didn't grow through comfort, they don't know whether to respect you, align with you, or step out of your way, and the most unsettling part for them. You didn't announce any of this. You didn't walk in demanding recognition. You didn't correct their assumptions. You didn't expose anyone. You didn't pull receipts from your past or explain the weight you've carried. You just kept moving. That's what made it heavier. Because real power doesn't pause to clarify misunderstandings. Real strength doesn't beg to be seen accurately. It lets observation do the work. And as they watched you longer, they realized something that made their comfort evaporate. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because you were listening. You weren't patient because you lacked urgency. You were patient because you understood timing. You weren't calm because life had been kind to you. You were calm because you survived moments that taught you. Panic is useless. That realization hit them slowly, then all at once. They started replaying old interactions in their minds. The jokes they made, the assumptions they carried, the times they thought they were ahead of you, the moments they mistook your restraint for passivity. And suddenly, those memories felt different, heavier, sharper. Because once people understand that someone's background forged instincts instead of entitlement, they stop treating them casually. Your upbringing wasn't a setback, it was a forge. Every difficult season sharpened something in you. Every disappointment refined your perception. Every moment of being underestimated trained you to see deeper, think further, and move more intentionally. You didn't inherit ease. You inherited awareness. You didn't grow up rehearsing confidence. You grew up building it from necessity. And people who haven't lived that kind of life can feel it. They may not have language for it, but their behavior changes instinctively. Their tone adjusts. Their jokes soften. Their attempts to test you disappear. Because they realize you're not someone who reacts impulsively. You're someone who calculates quietly. That's when the switch-up becomes obvious. The same people who once spoke freely around you now choose their words carefully. The same ones who underestimated your awareness now hesitate before making moves. The same ones who thought they had you figured out suddenly realize they never did. And still, you say nothing. Because you don't need to confirm what they've already sensed. You don't need to announce where you come from. Your presence carries that information. Your energy does the talking. Your consistency does the explaining. You move like someone who has been through enough to know exactly who they are. You don't overreact. You don't overshare. You don't over-explain, you observe. You adjust. You continue. And that's what unsettles them the most. Not your success. Not your progress. Not your but the realization that your strength wasn't built in public. It was built in silence. In environments that demanded maturity before comfort, clarity before ease. They can't compete with that. They can't imitate that. They can't calculate that. Because you didn't learn resilience as a concept. You lived it. You didn't study discipline as a theory. You embodied it. You didn't practice emotional control for performance. You mastered it for survival. And once that truth lands, people don't treat you the same. They switch up because they finally understand that you're not rising temporarily. You're evolving permanently, that you don't fold under pressure because pressure is familiar territory for you, that your calm isn't fragile, it's fortified. They start to realize you're not someone they can play with, predict, or outmaneuver. You come from a background that taught you how to anticipate, how to adapt, how to endure without losing yourself. And that kind of foundation doesn't announce itself loudly. It just stands. You let them feel it on their own. You don't chase respect. You don't demand loyalty. You don't seek validation. You let understanding arrive when it's ready. And now, as they slowly adjust their behavior around you, as they recalibrate their assumptions and rethink their narratives, you remain exactly where you are, grounded, aligned, moving forward. Without explanation, because people who know where they come from don't need applause. People who've carried real weight don't need permission. And people forged in pressure don't need to prove their strength. They already know it. And this is only the beginning of them realizing who they've been standing next to all along. And the more time passes, the clearer it becomes why that shift unsettled them so deeply. Because once people realize your strength is rooted in experience, not performance, they can't interact with you the same way anymore. They can't speak loosely. They can't move recklessly. They can't test boundaries without sensing consequences that don't need to be announced. Your background taught you something most people never had to learn. How to remain composed when things are heavy, how to stay observant when others panic, how to choose silence without losing control. You weren't raised to react, you were raised to endure. And endurance leaves a different kind of imprint. People who grew up cushioned by comfort often mistake loudness for confidence. They mistake movement for progress. They mistake opinions for wisdom, but you learned early that real power doesn't rush. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't need to dominate a room to own it. It simply exists with certainty, and certainty changes the temperature wherever it goes. That's why their behavior adjusted before their words did. You noticed it in the pauses, in the hesitation before they spoke, in the way they started watching you instead of overlooking you. They began to realize that your calm wasn't passive, it was selective, that your kindness wasn't naïve, it was intentional, that your distance wasn't confusion, it was clarity. You didn't arrive at this place overnight. You were shaped by moments where you had to choose between breaking down and building discipline. You were shaped by situations where complaining wouldn't change anything, so you learned to adapt. You were shaped by responsibility arriving earlier than it should have, forcing you to mature in ways others still haven't. And that history lives in you. It lives in how you read energy before words are spoken. It lives in how you sense shifts before they become obvious. It lives in how you don't overcommit, overshare, or overextend anymore. That's when people realize they can't treat you casually. Because casual treatment only works on people who haven't survived depth. They start to understand that you don't move from impulse, you move from discernment, that every step you take is measured, not because you lack courage, but because you understand consequence. You don't burn bridges emotionally because you learned long ago that stability comes from self-control, not reaction. That's when the switch up turns into respect mixed with uncertainty. Some people try to align with you suddenly. Some try to rebrand their past behavior. Some pull away quietly, unsure how to recalibrate. Because when someone realizes you come from a background that required real resilience, it confronts their own narrative. It forces them to compare their challenges with yours, their endurance with yours, their discipline with yours. And comparison isn't comfortable when the contrast is too sharp. You never needed to say where you came from. Your behavior revealed it. You didn't rush to defend yourself when misunderstood. You didn't seek sympathy when overlooked. You didn't crumble when underestimated. You adjusted. And that adjustment is what made them uneasy. Because adjustment requires awareness. It requires strength without spectacle. It requires a level of emotional intelligence that can't be taught quickly or copied easily. Your upbringing taught you how to stay steady while others destabilize themselves. It taught you how to listen between the lines, how to notice when words don't match actions, how to recognize patterns long before others are aware. They're repeating them. That's when people realize something critical. You don't need to react to win. You don't need to argue to be right. You don't need to expose anyone to protect yourself. Your foundation does that for you. And the moment they sense that, the power dynamic changes. They stop speaking over you. They stop assuming. They stop trying to test limits, because limits aren't something you announce, they're something you embody. You didn't grow through applause. You grew through pressure. You didn't develop strength through praise. You developed it through necessity. And necessity creates a different level of self-trust. The kind that doesn't seek reassurance. The kind that doesn't need constant affirmation. That's why your presence feels heavier now. Not loud. Not intimidating. Just grounded. And grounded people unsettle those who rely on surface confidence, because surface confidence cracks when it's examined closely. Yours doesn't. Yours was built beneath pressure, refined through challenge, and reinforced by time. They notice how you don't overreact to disrespect, how you don't rush to prove anything, how you don't chase inclusion or validation. They realize that your standards aren't spoken, they're lived, and that realization forces a choice. Some people rise to meet it, others quietly remove themselves. Because not everyone is comfortable around someone whose strength is internal, not performative. Not everyone can coexist with someone who doesn't need to assert dominance to maintain authority. Your authority comes from knowing who you are and where you come from. You don't posture, you don't exaggerate, you don't inflate your story. You let your actions carry the weight. and the ones who switched up know exactly why they did. Even if they can't articulate it, they felt the difference between someone who learned strength and someone who inherited comfort. They felt the contrast between surface-level resilience and lived endurance. They realized you aren't easy to manipulate because you've seen too much. You aren't quick to trust because you've learned patterns. You aren't eager to explain because you've learned that clarity doesn't need witnesses. That's when people start treating you carefully, not out of fear, out of awareness. Because awareness recognizes depth when it sees it. It understands that someone who has survived real pressure doesn't need to announce it. It shows up in how they move, how they speak, how they choose silence over reaction. Your background didn't harden you. It refined you. It taught you restraint instead of aggression, observation instead of assumption, alignment instead of approval. And that refinement is what shifted the energy. You didn't change who you were to be respected. You simply continued being who you are long enough for the truth to surface. And once it did, people had to adjust. They now understand that your patience is strategic. Your kindness is measured. Your distance is intentional. They see that you don't operate from ego. You operate from experience. And experience doesn't announce itself loudly. It simply knows. So you keep walking forward. Calm, focused, unbothered. You don't pause to correct narratives. You don't wait for apologies. You don't slow down to make others comfortable. Because comfort was never what built you. You were built in moments that demanded clarity, discipline, and self-respect. And now, those same qualities are what make you impossible to misread anymore. They switched up because they finally saw it, and you didn't need to say a word. And now, here's the part most people never talk about. Once the switch happens, once they finally understand where you come from, they don't just see you differently, they see themselves differently too. And that's the real shift. That's the quiet discomfort behind their changed tone, their careful words, their sudden respect. Because your presence forces a comparison they never intended to make. Not out loud, not openly, but internally. They start noticing how quickly they fold under pressure while you remain steady, how easily they react while you observe, how often they need reassurance while you move forward without it. And in that contrast, something settles in their chest, the realization that your strength wasn't accidental, and it wasn't borrowed, it was built. Built when you didn't have room to fall apart. Built when silence was safer than speaking. Built when responsibility arrived early, and excuses weren't an option. That kind of foundation doesn't fade. It doesn't weaken with time. It only becomes more visible. And that's why you don't chase explanations anymore. You don't feel the need to narrate your journey. You don't correct misunderstandings or defend your past. People who understand depth don't need footnotes. They recognize it instantly. You've reached a place where your energy does the talking for you. Your calm answers questions before they're asked. Your restraint communicates boundaries without confrontation. Your consistency builds trust without promises. And the ones who once underestimated you now move differently around you. Even if they don't realize why, they choose their words. They slow their pace. They stop assuming access. Not because you demanded it, because your alignment required it. You didn't rise by becoming louder. You rose by becoming clearer, clear about what you accept, clear about what you tolerate, clear about what no longer deserves your time. And clarity is magnetic. It reorganizes dynamics without force. It resets expectations without announcements. It teaches people how to treat you simply by how you treat yourself. That's the quiet authority you carry now. You don't need approval because you already know your worth. You don't need validation because your history validates you. You don't need attention because you're aligned with yourself. And alignment is something no one can take away. So grounded, focused, intentional. You let people reveal themselves without interruption. You let situations unfold without rushing to control them. You let truth surface on its own time, because you've learned that real strength doesn't force outcomes, it prepares for them. And the people who switched up, they weren't reacting to your success. They were responding to your foundation. They finally saw what shaped you, and they understood something they couldn't ignore. You're not someone who needs to be guided. You're not someone who needs to be managed. You're not someone who needs to be tested. You're someone who has already been tested and passed. So the story doesn't end with applause. It ends with certainty. You walk forward knowing exactly who you are. They watch, knowing exactly why they misjudged you, and nothing needs to be said. Because your presence is already the conclusion.